The South African government is planning to establish a state-owned enterprise for water in 2025. Parliament has passed the National Water Resource Infrastructure Bill to pave a way for water state-owned enterprise. Some of the key functions of the entity is to collect revenue from the sale of water. Joining us is Executive Manager at Watercan, Dr. Ferial Adam. Dr. Adam, thank you so much for joining us on Daytime Update. What's your reaction to this? It looks like it will be set to take place in 2025, but when we consider South Africa's history when it comes to state-owned entities, we've got numerous reports that prove that they are really on their knees right now. So as Watercan, what are your thoughts about this new agency?
Good afternoon, Marcia, and thank you for having me on your show, and good afternoon to the viewers. I think you raised some of the issues. Just to add that this entity did not just come about now. It's been long in the making, or, in the pipelines with the Department of Water and Sanitation. I think almost during the time of Minister Sisulu's reign as minister. So the idea is to bring everything under one agency. And I agree with you. I think that we are concerned because when you add into another state-owned entity, it's a big chunk of a budget. How does that impact already a struggling Department of Water and Sanitation to actually do what they need to do? So I think I understand where the thinking happened and why there was this entity at that particular point. But at this point, I'm wondering if we still need to go with a state-owned entity on certain issues. And I'm sure the DWS will think so, yes.
Yeah, and also I guess the other question, Dr. Adam, is the how, how will this all be done? Because also it's already enshrined in our constitution that water is a basic human right, and the Department of Water and Sanitation, of course, has that responsibility to implement that. But when we look at the stats, for instance, of how poor our water quality is in some areas as well, some areas not even having water at all, is this agency going to be able to do what the department wasn't able to do for decades?
So that's exactly the issue. Although the department has been operating much better in the last couple of years, I think that the idea, in terms of what they will take on will be mostly your bulk projects, your bulk pipelines. They will take in, the Trans-Caledon Tunnel Authority. I think that's supposed to come into this state-owned entity. So those are the big projects, but it doesn't really make a difference for the people in the municipalities and actual water access. And that is the challenge that we're having right now. So it's that funding model we're not quite clear on, and exactly what that money is going to be spent on.
Yeah, and when we think about, we were talking about, the element of corruption that's also been involved in some other state-owned entities as well. You think about a water treatment plant like Rooiwal, for instance, with an agency like this coming into the fore, but also it being the state that gave those tenders and those contracts to allegedly dubious business people who weren't able to then fulfill their mandates and ensure that the Rooiwal water treatment plant works sufficiently and properly. And now we saw that cholera outbreak as well in Hammanskraal as part of a result of the poor water treatment that's going on there. How then will this agency be able to eliminate that? Because the agency will still be state-owned. It was the state that did business, allegedly with dubious business people, that led to the collapse of some treatment plants.
So that's exactly it, is that we South Africans, we're very nervous about additional state-owned entities. And the idea that having a state-owned entity will mean that there won't be any corruption. We can look at municipal-owned entities, we can look at state-owned entities, and there's always a potential for corruption. We just need to look at what had happened at Eskom. We need to look at a whole range of other state-owned entities where corruption was rife. And does it not open, actually, if you're having a corrupt kind of government, does it open up the door further for increased corruption? And that is a concern when you have state-owned entities. And I think, for me, the kind of challenge is that every time we have a blockage and we have a challenge at a government level, we open up a commission or we have a state-owned entity, and that increases the cost to government. We already have a bloated government at the moment with so many ministers, deputy ministers, etc. Can we afford this? How do we make sure that the purpose that this is set up for actually happens, and that we actually get that from a government perspective?
And speaking of that increasing of cost to government, Dr. Adam, it was the new Minister of Water, Phemima Jodina, who said that the agency will enable them to borrow additional funds to strengthen the balance sheet. What do you make of that?
So I think a lot of the big bulk projects that government takes up anyway is not just funded by government, that they do have loans to actually make sure that those things happen. So that is the norm in terms of that. So I'm trying to understand how that would help. I guess it's about the bureaucracy, because if at government level you have to go through quite a few steps to actually make sure that those loans are approved. So having an entity on its own can then borrow in its own name. It's not as if that borrowing doesn't happen at some level. So we're seeing that does occur. The challenge is that this, combined with the kind of partnerships that government talks about, with having stronger public-private partnerships, and it is the water sector, we cannot but be nervous that this will take us into a route of privatizing our water. And that is something we are guarding against. I mean, I think that the last thing we need is privatization of our water. It has not worked globally. And the UK is a case in point where they're struggling. They have as bad canals and sewage spilling into, and they can't drink their tap water as we do in South Africa. So I think we need to guard against going down that route.
And I mean, just looking at recent reports by the Department of Water and Sanitation, the numbers are quite scary when you think of it. And I just want to go through some of these with you, Dr. Adam. I mean, 46% of drinking water fail to meet microbiological standards. We've got 40.8% of leaks that remain unaccounted for. And of course, 67.6% of wastewater treatments are inadequately processed of sewage. When we are dealing with reports like this coming from the department itself, how will this agency help with this quality of water treatment, this quality of drinking water, and to stop and prevent leaks, basically making the infrastructure better?
So that is our concern, because at the bulk supply level, this is what this agency is supposed to be looking at, right? So it's supposed to be looking at how does it procure, so looking at procurement to get these large canals, the large pipelines that the Department of Water and Sanitation is responsible for. And that is trying to look at how do they do that without the kind of bureaucracy that government has in terms of their procurement policies. It's not corruption, it's just speeding up the processes. But all that you mentioned, right, in terms of the wastewater treatment works, the quality of drinking water, and the leakage from our municipal water supplies lies at a local government level. I am still not clear what this state-owned entity will be doing in response to that, because that is where our big challenges are. And that for me is still unanswered and is still the biggest challenge we have in terms of our water. So I don't think that entity or the state-owned entity will be responding to municipal services, which is where our challenges lie.
And that's exactly what we have seen, also making that example of Hammanskraal. Dr. Adam, thank you so much for joining us on Daytime Update this afternoon.